Good morning to everybody and welcome to our seminar, Revit Structure 2024 and beyond. So let's do some introductions. So my name is Lawrence Hooker. I have over 25 years experience working at Symmetry and previously at Excitec. I kind of look after most of our structural products. Obviously Revit is one of those that I look after, and I have a focus in structural engineering and general design.
Hi, I'm Alan Johnson. I'm one of Lawrence's colleagues on the structural team here at Symmetry. Most of my background is architectural and structural. I'm a certified instructor and I've been training Autodesk products for over 10 years.
Okay, so what we're going to basically look at on this webinar here is the updates that we've seen from Revit 2022 onwards to 24 and how we can extend some of these workflows. So something that's quite apparent to me is that even though our current release of Autodesk Revit is at 2024, essentially what we're really interested in here is how many people are using Revit 2024. And I'd imagine most of us are on older releases, perhaps 21 still, or some of you might have moved to 2022. So of course, over that period of time, there's been many updates, not just the features, but also performance as well, which is critical to making sure that we are kind of working as productive as possible. So the type of things we're going to look at here is platform productivity. We'll then look at reinforced concrete updates. I think every release of Revit, they always add something new in there. We'll look at some new workflows and procedures with the analytical modeling side of things. And then my colleague Anna Johnson is going to take you through some of the updates with sheets. We'll then look at some new features for scheduling, which is really, really cool. Onto revisions, and then finally I'll close out with publishing and exporting views out of Revit. So that'll be talking about printing and plotting physical sheets, but also exporting DWGs and PDFs and so on. So without further ado, let's go directly into the platform productivity tools. Okay, so we'll start with Revit 2022. So a new feature brought in here was the ability to search in the project browser. Another new feature was snap between points. So what this means is those of you who come from AutoCAD, you can actually snap mid between 2 points. So in the example in the bottom right hand corner, you can see that we've snapped to the center of 2 columns there, which then gives us the intersection or the midpoint between those 2 elements. Can be quite useful for things like mirroring operations. Pretty much all dialog boxes now in Revit 2022 can be filtered by a category. So we all know that there's lots and lots of categories within Revit. We've always had the ability here to filter lists, so we could filter it by architecture, structure, M&E, and so on. But now we can actually do a category name search as well to filter that down even better. And I think very high on the wish list was 3-dimensional grids. So we've had 3D levels for a number of releases now, but now in Revit 2022, we can enable 3-dimensional grids. Moving that productivity on into Revit 2023, we have some performance increases. Now, like I've said, upgrading to a newer version of Revit isn't just all about the features, it's also about the performance increases that we can get. Increasingly now we're all working on bigger projects, larger models, and performance is critical. So what we have now is parallel processing when we're exporting or printing documents. So that makes life a lot easier when we're publishing out lots and lots of PDFs and printed documents. Also, if we have complex sketch loops on walls or floor slabs, that's now been expedited as well. So we now have much better performance in those areas. Another really obvious thing that we've never been able to do in Revit is measure in the 3D view. It seems astonishing that you could only measure in a 2D view, but that was the case. So now we can actually measure in a 3D view across multiple elements. So that's quite useful. Another thing we can do here is embed 3D field regions into our 3D families, which is quite useful. And another biggie here is IFC mapping. Now, Previously, the mapping within Revit to the IFC classes wasn't particularly good, and we had to take manual control over that to make sure that we're getting the correct classifications in the IFC export. But again, now that's been built into Revit 2023. Extending on to 2024, we now have a completely new architecture for our project browser. So this has been completely built from the ground up, and we can now search and filter in that project browser. We can also link coordination models now from Autodesk Docs or the Autodesk Construction Cloud. This opens up all sorts of massive workflows. So, obvious ones for me are linking things that Revit wouldn't normally support. So Rhino is a good example. Inventor, things like Plant 3D and so on. So any format that Autodesk Docs can actually host, we can now link into our Revit 2024 model. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these in action. So we're going to start with the search function in Revit 2022. So you can see now I've searched for section, and each time I click next, you can now see it iterates through not just the views, but also all of the content that contains that search string. We'll now look at the snap mid between 2 points. So in this case, I'm going to take those structural openings, and I'm actually going to mirror those across the center of the grids. Now, obviously here I haven't got any reference planes set up, but I can use snap between midpoints, and then you can see I've got the midpoint there, and now you can see those structural openings are mirrored to the other side. Okay, so next one we'll take a look at now. We'll go on to the filtering of the visibility graphics. So here I'm going to do a search for categories. So I'm just going into reference planes here, and then we can switch that off and hit apply. And now let's say that I want to obviously control things like sections as well. Again, you can see very quick and easy with that filtering capability. Okay, we're also now going to activate our 3D grids. And notice you can do it by level. So I've chosen now to show my 3D grids on level 0, which is our ground floor. And of course, now we can see those 3D grids directly in the 3D view, which is obviously something we've kind of been waiting for a fair old time. Into Revit 2023, we can now activate the measure tool directly in the 3D view. As I say, it was a bit surprising that we couldn't do this in previous releases. So now I'm just going to measure the thickness or depth of the pile cap. You can see it's 900. And then of course we can directly then go to measure the width as well. We might want to measure the material width on this column here, the material thickness. And again, we've got that directly in Revit. So that is quite useful. Moving into some IFC classification, you can now see that we have export to IFC built into Revit, and we have this classification tool. So I've just now done a search for footings, and now I can say this is a pile cap. We'll do the same thing with the pile. So we'll do a tab select to get the nested pile. We'll go into our export as. Again, we can search. So we'll type in the term pile in here. We can pick the IFC pile. And then in this case, it might be a friction pile, for example. And again, that's now classified. So you can see this is done at the instance level, but it could also be done at type level as well, if required. And of course, they all have IFC GUIs. In 2024, we're now going to look at the linking of Autodesk Docs. So what we're now doing is we can go into any file in Autodesk Docs or the Construction Cloud. In this case, I'm going to go into one of our bridge projects. And here I'm going to actually go ahead and link in an IPT file, which is an inventor part. So of course here, you can see it's a bridge pier. We can actually view that and check it, have a look at it there. We can decide how that's going to be linked into the project. So by shared coordinates in this example. Okay, and we'll then see that bridge pier in our project. So this is really there for in-context modeling. Okay, so we'll create a section just to actually elevate it. So I'm cutting through it at the minute, but we'll just move that down. So we're just elevating the section here. You can now see that we've got the section open, and in here we can actually snap to this as well. So we'll use our measure tool once again, and you can now see we can start to snap through this and have a look at what's going on. Okay. So let's now move into some reinforced concrete updates. So I think, as I said earlier, I think every single release of Revit has had updates to reinforced concrete functionality. And it's getting to the point now where we've got some really, really good technology just sitting inside Revit. So let's now have a look at some of these new features. So again, we'll start off with Revit 2022. And one of the things that I really loved with this release was the ability to place out rebar by picking 2 points. So if we look at the images on the screen here, we can see that we have this wide reinforced concrete beam, and of course we might need more than one link between the bars. So this was always quite difficult to do in previous releases, and now we can just go to 2 points, pick a start point and an end point, and that link is created automatically. We can also use it to add in additional reinforcement into things like walls and slabs, so that's quite useful as well. You can see that we've got control for horizontal and vertical placement of those bars by 2 points as well. And again, in this release, another thing we can do is start to edit and modify rebar sets. So for example, I might have a drainage component going through a slab and I need to actually remove one of the bars in the rebar set, or perhaps I just need to move it. We can now do that within Revit 2022. So moving into 23, this is probably one of the most significant changes, I think, to rebar, is now we can propagate the reinforcement. We can either do it by host or by face. So if you look at the example in the bottom left, you can see that we've reinforced the beam that's highlighted in red there, and then we can propagate it to similar configurations. Now I've said the word similar there because you can see that all of those beams are slightly different. We've got beams that are a bit deeper, a bit wider, a bit longer, a bit shorter, but it doesn't matter. We can propagate that rebar through to all of those elements that we select. So before this, we'd have had to have grouped the reinforcement bar and manually copied it and then tried to stretch it and update it to suit the elements. But that is a really good workflow. And of course, you can see on the right-hand side, I've got this connection between the beam and the column. And you can see now I've got some bars that are cast into the column. And actually, I'm using our propagate tool aligned by face in this case here to allow us to actually then propagate that to a similar connection. So you can see this beam isn't quite as deep, but again, all of the rebar constraints will adapt to that situation. Into Revit 2024, what we've extended here is the ability to align freeform rebar. So you can see here we have a concrete intake for a hydroelectric power station. This is for a turbine. So what's happening here, of course, is we have a very complex shape and we have some freeform rebar that's been added into this model. Of course, you can see that all of the bar is currently aligned to the edge of the turbine concrete rather than actually being vertical. So now we can actually control the alignment and orientation of these complex reinforced components. So once again, we can now extend that workflow further with some of our own technology. So this is Naviate rebar. And what this is going to allow us to do is place reinforcement bar into typical elements. So you can see on our ribbon here, we have things like beam, column, wall, structural openings, and connections. So this expedites the actual initial placement of the reinforcement bar into the elements. So let's have a look at some of this technology in action. So you can see here, I have a beam, there's a wide beam in here, and now we're going to actually place in an additional link. Now, the first thing we'll do is we'll have a look at the previous way this would have worked. So now, if I go to the member here, you can see that the link is always expanding to the cover, which was a bit of a pain, really. Now, we're going to go to 2 points. We can say parallel to work plane, or we can simply just pick a start point, move over to the end point, use the space bar to cycle the hook, and very simply place down that additional link. So the 2 point placement has really helped there. Looking at placing out additional reinforcement bar, we can now look at the 2 point method. And in this example here, we're going to put it on the top face of the slab, so the near cover, and we'll use a horizontal placement just with a straight bar. And again, we can just pick 2 points to place out all of that reinforcement bar. Yeah, nice and easy. We'll also then place some additional bar in. So we'll go to the far cover reference, which is the bottom cover of the slab, and again, place out some vertical bar in this case. So you can see it's really quick and efficient to place in those types of reinforcement. However, we can also do it in section as well. So we'll just kind of shorten that sectional view in there. You can see we've already got some bars along the top cover of the slab. We'll now go to rebar, 2 point, and notice now we've got perpendicular segment. And I can simply pick a start point and then run those rebars along any vector that I want. So again, very quick and easy to place out that type of reinforcement. Into 2023, this is one of my favorites, as I said before. This is propagate rebar. You can see that we've got that column reinforced. All of the columns you can see here are similar, but they're all rotated slightly differently. So we'll then go and propagate all that rebar through. And literally in a couple of seconds, all that rebar has propagated to all those other columns and adapted. However, it's not just about complete elements. You can get individual components of reinforcement. So in this case, the opening on this face here, we're going to now say align by face. We can then pick the face that we want to be the host, which is this front face of that wall. And then we can propagate that to similar faces. So again, you can see how useful that function really is. Okay. We'll now look at the freeform rebar. So what we'll do first is we'll actually use freeform rebar to get in the rest of the reinforcement. So I'll select the host. I'll then use the path, which is the top of that, or the top edge of that turbine placement there. We can set out our distribution. Okay, we can set our type, so that would be a H20. We'll put the spacing in. Maybe we'll use 300 there. Okay, and we'll place that bar in. Obviously, at the minute, it's just straight bars. There's no actual hooks in there. So we want to kind of make this a U-bar. So I'm going to actually use the function of utilizing hooks at the start and the end. And of course, the shape code will be detected directly from the shape here. We can then override the hook lengths as well. So in this case here, when we override those hook lengths, you can see they're normally preset, but we can now type in whatever length we want for those hooks. And there we have the reinforcement. Now, of course, we'll notice that it's not vertically aligned to the member. And this was a problem in previous releases. So in this release now, we can go to bar alignment and we can simply set vertical. You can see now that rebar then very easily snaps into the vertical plane. So really, really handy. Yep, so some complex reinforcement there. Okay, so that's the freeform. So what we'll now do is we'll have a look at some of our own technology now from Naviate Rebar. So we're going to now populate the reinforcement in that column that we just saw earlier on. So obviously with normal Revit, you'd have to manually place all that rebar in, but using our Naviate Rebar tool, we can use this modeless dialog box to very efficiently populate that with reinforcement. So here I'm choosing my shape, which is preloaded from our standard template. We can then select our configuration of links in here. So I'm having 2 links in this example here. We can then go on and start looking at the main reinforcement for the column. We can configure the number of bars in each axis, the bar type and diameter that we might require in there. And then into the distribution, we've got essentially percentages, or we can do it by lengths. We can have 1 distribution range, 2 distribution ranges, or 3. We can then obviously set up our spacings in each of those distributions. If we wanted starter bars, we can enable those, but in this case, I don't want those. And then I'll then apply that into the model. Now to visualize that, I can directly go to the rebar tab here and say show obscured. And you can now see that Naviate just makes that rebar visible. We'll then save this as a named configuration. So this is now saved as C1. And what's really neat here is we can then just select all items or all instances of that column, make sure that we're using the C1 propagation, and then click apply, and Naviate will simultaneously apply that rebar to all of those elements. The benefit with this as well is if anything actually changes, if the configuration changes, I can edit it, yeah, which is very useful. Let's now have a look at some structural openings in here. So this is a door, so it's not a traditional wall opening. We've used a door in this example. However, our opening reinforcement still works with this. We can then start to configure it in here. So we're setting in our shape code for the U-bars around the edge. We can set up our distribution, our main reinforcement bars as required, and then the anti-crack bars as well, you know, or the diagonal bars on the corners there. Again, that's all configured by the lap length and how many bars we want, and then we can apply that. Again, we can visualize it with our Naviate Rebar tool to make that unobscured. Okay, so you've just seen a couple of little features there that expedite those features and that productivity further on from standard Revit. So we're now moving to our next area, which is analytical modeling. So here we have a completely new concept for the construction and management of analytical models within Revit. So why change? Why are we changing this? Well, one of the things that we had a problem with here is that how we generally construct a building isn't necessarily how you would analyze it from a structural point of view. So we've got an example here on screen. You can see that we have a floor plate and all of the steelwork that's actually supporting that composite deck is actually below the floor. So of course that's how it's built, but not necessarily how we want to analyze that. We can also get misaligned elements as well. So you can see that the columns have no continuity between them. So of course that will cause instabilities and so on. We also had limited control over the editing of an analytical model. And for me, the biggest problem was ownership. You know, the engineers, the design team want to actually own this engineering model here, and the technicians want to own their physical model, okay? And that wasn't possible in earlier versions of Revit. Now, another thing that's quite significant for me is the ability now to actually allow the engineer to start that design off. So the engineer can start to actually create that analytical model even before the technicians have built the physical model. So let's have a look at how some of these features would actually work. So this came out in Revit 2023, and we've now got what we term as an independent analytical model. So you can see in the ribbon tab here, we can actually create our analytical members, our panels, which could represent walls or floors. But interestingly, the panel can also represent lots of other elements as well. Stairs is a great example. Now, obviously, in previous releases of Revit, we didn't have an analytical model for a stair, but now the panel can represent all sorts of different things. What we can then do is associate those analytical elements that we've modeled to their physical counterparts, okay? And typically what will happen then is you can see that we have a structural role. In this case, it's a beam showing here in the properties palette. We have a section type that we can apply, a material, and so on. What we can then do is actually then generate the analytical model automatically from the Dynamo player if we wanted to. Okay, so although we can take manual control, we can expedite the creation of that by using Dynamo player. In 24, we've kind of improved some of these tools. So we can now have curved panels. We can now automatically acquire the properties from the physical model. And we can automatically create a physical from the analytical. So we can go the opposite way around. So as I've said, the engineering team, the designers, can now actually lay out an analytical model, and then at a later point, a physical model can be built from that analytical model. So let's now have a look at this. We're going to start here by placing out some beams in here. So you can see I'm using start endpoint definition. We've got a material set. We can choose our structural role, which is now going to be a beam, and then the section size that we might want to run with. So I'm using a in situ beam here. And using sort of typical CAD tools in here, we can just go around and snap to the grids. So, you know, if you've been used to using AutoCAD or some other engineering tools, this isn't too different. You can just snap around those. We've also got things like copy, of course. We're used to using copy and many other different design and CAD tools. So again, the engineers can utilize a very similar type of tool to enable you to lay out your analytical model. Of course, the benefit of creating a single analytical model in Revit is it can be then used across multiple analysis applications. For example, you might use it in Robot, you might use it in ETABS, you might use it in Tekla Structural Designer, for example. So you can just see we've created a panel there representing a wall. We'll now go back to the same panel tool again, and now we're going to represent this as a floor slab. So again, we can just use simple sketching tools to develop our floor over this. Okay, so we'll just get that as we want. And there's our floor slab. Of course, we now need some boundary conditions in here as well. So we'll place out these. So we'll have a linear condition underneath the wall, and then just point supports underneath each of these sticks representing the structural columns. So I'll get all those placed out like so. And then we can start to cast our eye on loading. Now, loading has changed in 2024, and now everything is hosted. So we can't actually put an unhosted load on something, which is good, because obviously it will update and change as we require. And there's our analytical model. What we'll now do is use the automation tools of Dynamo Player to actually build a physical model from this. Okay? So this is new in Revit 2024. Okay, so we'll now leave everything set to true there, and we'll run the tool. And now if we open up the actual physical 3D model in here, you can now see that we've actually got columns, beams, floors and walls. Now again here, this isn't now how we construct this, so we want to drop down that ring beam around the side. So we can do that independently of the analytical model. So I can select all of those elements, change the justification to top of concrete, and there we are. We can now see we have that element in there. We don't need the beams on the edge there, so we can delete those out, and there it is. So that's a completely new concept with regard to analytical modeling. Okay, so I'll now hand over to my colleague, Adam.
Okay, so I'm going to have a look at working with sheets. So in Revit 2022, the new feature there was duplicate sheets. So we had the ability there to create a sheet and then duplicate it as either an empty sheet or with the sheet detailing or with just the views. In 2023 then, we have the ability to not only duplicate the sheets, but swap the views automatically within those sheets. 2024, we then have the ability to move any views aligned into the exact same position on any sheet we choose. And we also can do multiple views on one sheet. And if we just have a look at our own tech there, Naviate, how we can advance this workflow. So we have a tool there to generate the sheets, multiple sheets with the views and the title block data, and all the views are in the same position. We can then configure and tag multiple views, auto dimension grids. We can synchronize and create crop regions, so we've got the same crop region on all those sheets. We can also generate legends and apply those to different sheets, and we also have the ability then to manage those parameters and edit those parameters. So if we take a look at this, so in Revit 22 we can duplicate a sheet. So if I create the sheet, I'll just drop some views on here. First of all, position those, maybe drop a schedule on there. So we can now duplicate this sheet. So if you right click, duplicate sheet, you'll see you've got sheet with detailing or with views. And then you have the option there with the detailing. So we'll create this copy of this sheet. We can then rename it. So we'll change that from ground floor to first floor. Obviously, the view is wrong at this point. So what we'd have to do then is place a correct view on there. So I'll create my, copy my first floor view on there, and I'll reposition it. So just snapping that view into the exact same position of the original view, and then I'll just remove that original view. So yes, we can do it, but it's a bit time consuming actually swapping those views out. And then we just update the title block as well, make sure we've got the right drawing numbers on there. Just fill that information in and manually added the buy and checked and date information in there as well. Okay, so then if we jump to 2023, we can obviously do this same process. So we can duplicate our sheet, again with the views, with the detailing. But this is where 2023 gets a little bit better, because all I need to do is just select that view on the sheet, and then I can swap it out for any other view that I want. So making that process much, much faster and easier to do. And then I'll just delete off the copied views. So looking at 2024 then, we can use the filter option in the project browser just to look for those core views. I can now actually select multiple views from my project browser and drag and drop multiple views at the same time onto a sheet. I can then position those views where I want them. If I then take a look at one of my other drawings then, I can actually select views on another sheet and drag and drop them onto this sheet. I can then say, well, actually, I don't want them. I could select those two views, right click, and then I can move and align them to the exact same position on a different sheet. We can also select a view, right click, and open the sheet that that view is on. And then if we have a look at our Naviate tools, so we have lots of really cool features in Naviate. What we're going to look at first there is actually copying that crop region to multiple views. So we just select, apply. Seems like the playback is frozen there. Right, so obviously we can apply the crop region to multiple sheets. We can also have the feature of creating sheets. So we use a template. So we have one drawing sheet already created. We use that as a template, and we can then generate multiple sheets for our views. We can also define the parameters that are going to be in that. Oh, sorry, the playback is. Yeah.
We then go to create sheets. So we've got a template sheet up over there, and you can now see that we can apply that to other sheets. So we'll apply that to all of those sheets in the list there. What's really good with this though is we can go into the parameters, and you can see down the bottom here that we can then just use Naviate to actually fit in all the codification on the sheet as well. So we're going to start with drawing number 5 and just simply use Excel-like tools to increment those settings down. Even with the sheet names, yeah, we can just come in and type in a name like this, copy that down initially. So we've got a copy of level 1 GA, and then again use dedicated tools to allow us to increment specific characters within a string. Usual sort of things for copying, so we can type in the who's approved the drawing and again just copy that down with the field copy. Okay. Not only that though, we can do that with shared parameters as well. So you can see we've got our level in here, we've got the role, and all of the codification that would be on shared parameters. Okay, so our role in this case is structural in here, and again we can just drag that down and field copy and then generate the sheets. Okay, I'll hand back to you, Anna, and hopefully your audio is good now. Okay, so you can now see all those sheets are created.
Okay. Right, so looking at schedules then. So in Revit 2022, we have the ability to split and place schedules. We could control the split position. We can split across multiple sheets. We can also specify the heights in there. In Revit 2023, which I really love this feature, we have the ability to filter the schedules based on the sheet. So as we place that schedule on the sheet, it will update to what is in that view. So really powerful. So if we have a look at that, so if I select my schedule and right click, use the split schedule and place on sheet, I can select a couple of sheets there. So we can define the height with a custom height if we want, or you can actually split evenly. we just click split and place. And when we come to place that on our sheet, you drop in the first one and you can see it automatically adds it to the second sheet. And then we can manually split those down again if you need to. So that's the 2022 feature. If we look at the 2023 one, if we go to the filter option for that schedule and activate filter by sheet, when I drag and drop that schedule onto my sheet, it will update automatically with the elements that are visible on that sheet. So if I were then to create a copy of that schedule, just close that one off, and drag that copy onto a different sheet, it will automatically update. So the schedule is live, showing me the information, what is visible. Okay, onto revisions. Okay, so revisions. In Revit 2022, we have the ability then to create complex revision sequences. So we can use prelim numbers and contract numbers and use the ISO 19650. In 2023, we have the ability then to add revisions to multiple sheets in one go. And in Revit 2024, we have the ability then to schedule and track revisions and the revision clouds also. So if we have a look at that, so what we do there is use the custom numbering, and you can see I've already got one in there for my prelim drawings. So just come out of that. If I then duplicate that, and we'll create a new one for our contract drawings, and I can just change the settings in there with a prefix, number of digits and so on, hit OK. So if we now add a new revision, I can change that sequence and just fill in the information I need there. So I can add the date, the description, issued to, issued by, all that kind of stuff. So just fill that in. And then if we OK that, we can then add those 3 revisions to our sheet. So we'll just tick, 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 hit OK. And now we've got our P and C sequences on one sheet. And so if we look at the 2023 then, so if I select multiple sheets, I can now add a single revision to multiple sheets in one go, which is very, very useful, especially if you want to add the same revision to multiple sheets. Okay, just check that, yeah. Okay, so looking at Revit 2024 then. So we now have the ability there to include the revision cloud in our schedule. So you can add other options within there. So once you've added that information, we can now use the highlight in model, and it will show us exactly which revision cloud that information is relating to. So we'll just do another one on that. So if you want to see what that revision is, we can then highlight in model, and that again will take us to that view, showing us exactly which revision that relates to. And so looking at our Naviate tool, we have a revision manager. So in here, when this loads up, what we've done is created some little packages of drawings. So I could select a couple of packages there, and then I can add multiple revisions to those 2 packages of drawings. So maybe we want that revision and we want that revision. We'll then hit OK. That will apply those different revisions to those 2 packages. So if we just deselect those packages and pick a different package, I can then go on and add a completely different revision to a different package, hit OK. And then we also have the ability to export that to Excel. And you can see in Excel there, we now have different revisions on different drawings. Okay, over to you, Lawrence.
Yep, thanks, Ellen. Okay, so what we're going to look at here now is publish and export. Now, one of the things that has always been a bit challenging is the ability to push out PDF files from Revit that are correctly codified, correctly named. Obviously, when we've created PDFs, we need to upload them perhaps to a CDE system or some sort of system that's going to check that naming convention. So what we've now got in Revit 2022 is the ability to spawn out multiple PDFs. And traditionally we would have had some sort of random name like sheet 0001 site plan or something, but now we can actually push that out with correct codification. And that codification can be built up from project information, views, and sheet information. Okay. In Revit 2023, extending that workflow, we can now control the order of printed sheets and exports. So in this edit print order dialog, we can just manually order those as we want to, or we can do it by our browser organization, which is quite interesting as well. In Naviate, we can extend all of those workflows on, not just by being able to push out PDFs, but we can also do a very similar thing for DWGs, Navisworks files, and IFCs and so on. And again, we can actually save name setups in here. We can configure folder paths where all of this data is going to end up, as well as configuring sheet sets and using those sheet sets within our publish and export tool. Also, this can actually be automated as well, so we don't have to sit there and wait for all of these drawings to kind of spool out manually. So let's take a look at some of this technology. So here we are in Revit 2022, and we'll begin by using our PDF export. So here, we're going to go into our selected views and sheets, and what we'll do first up was we'll just unhide the sheets, and we'll filter out all of the other irrelevant views. So we're just seeing our sheet views in the list. Okay, so they're now selected. We can then go into our naming rules. So you can see we can go to views, sheets, or the project information. And now you can see my codification has already been set up on the right-hand side. Okay, so we just simply add those fields across, and you can see I've put in some sample values, and I've also put separators in, and we get a preview of our codification. So that codification is now set up. We can just check some of the other settings in here, make sure everything is good and the location where we want it to go, and then simply hit export. So now looking into the folder, we can now see that all of those PDFs are spooled out with the correct naming convention. They can go directly up to our CDE system. Moving into Revit 2023, what we'll do here is we'll go and set up a browser organization first. So here we'll actually just use our drawing package organization, and you can now see the browser is obviously reconfigured for drawing packages in here. So what we'll now do is we'll go to our print tool. Okay, so just the standard print tool in here. We can set our printer name up and printer driver. We can then again use our tool here to filter out just the drawing sheets and make sure we're seeing all the drawing sheets in the list. We'll then check them all, and we'll just get rid of the starting view because obviously we don't want that in our package. But now we can edit that print order. Now, like we said, we can just manually do this simply by dragging the views around, just to actually change the print order manually. Yeah, so that can be quite useful. Or we can simply go to our browser organization, and you can see now we can do it by kind of the drawing package, okay, or however we want that to be sorted. So in this case now, we'll perhaps look at the issue date, for example, and again, that will be ordered by that date. So very, very handy and useful. Into our own technology, which is Naviate Accelerate, we'll now look at our publish tool. Now this extends the workflow a lot further because we can now actually do this not just for PDFs, but things like DWGs. And in here, I'm actually setting this up for a DWG export of the sheets and the models as well. So again, we can set up that list of sheets in here directly from within Naviate. You can see, again, it's understood the browser organization in there and the packaging that we were looking at earlier on. What we can then do is see that we've got 21 sheets. We can then configure our codification within Naviate. Now, the nice thing with this is the codification only needs to be done once, and then we can apply that simply by duplicating these exports onto other areas. So I'm just going to go through and actually place out all of our shared parameters that build up our ISO 19650 codification in here. So we'll get all of that added in. We can then go ahead and start to put in suffixes in there as well. So I'm just having a hyphen between all of those elements. Okay, and it's now configured. So obviously now what we could do is we can actually add in any other kind of file format that we wanted to. In this case, we'll just punch out the sheets. We can use a common folder if we want to. So we'll just go and set up our PDF folder in there. And then we can simply hit publish. And then Naviate will start to spawn out all of those DWGs. And of course, the key thing here is that they're named correctly. So of course, like we've said before, if we want to put these up to a CDE system that's going to check this codification, yeah, we're now in a good place. We don't have to do it manually, which is always a benefit. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time out to watch our webinar. So we've obviously gone through the transition from Revit 2022 to Revit 2024 and beyond using some of our Naviate own technology. Now, if you want to have a look at some of our Naviate functionality, this particular link here is for Naviate Structure. That automatically comes with Naviate Accelerate, but also do look at Naviate Rebar as well, which is quite interesting. Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much for everyone attending and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.